All right, today we are diving into some of the toughest questions you can possibly imagine. We're talking about those ethical nightmares where there are no good answers, no easy outs. We're going to try to find a way to think through the impossible. I mean, really think about that. You're in a situation where no matter what you choose, somebody gets hurt. Every single path you could take leads to a tragedy. This isn't just some abstract puzzle. This is a really human problem that makes us question everything we think we know about right and wrong. So, to wrap our heads around this, we're not going to use hypotheticals. We're going to look at three real and frankly heartbreaking stories. These are not just thought experiments. These are tragedies that real people, real families had to live through. And they're going to be our guide to figuring out a better way to think about these choices. First up, we have the case of baby Theresa. She was born with a fatal condition called anencephaly. Basically, her brain stem was there, but the higher parts of her brain, the parts for consciousness, for thought, for feeling, they just weren't there. She had zero hope of a conscious life and was going to die in a matter of days. Her parents, in an act of incredible bravery, wanted to donate her organs to save other babies. But here's the catch. The law said they had to wait until she was legally dead, but by then, her organs would be useless. Next, we have Jodie and Mary. They were conjoined twins, sharing a single heart and one set of lungs. The doctors were very clear. If they stayed together, both would die within 6 months. But there was another option. Surgery could separate them, and Jodie could go on to live a totally normal, healthy life. The awful part? The act of separating them would mean that Mary, who is the weaker twin and totally dependent on Jodie, would die instantly. Their parents, deeply religious, refused to choose to sacrifice one of their daughters for the other. And finally, there's the story of Tracy Latimer. She was a 12-year-old girl with a severe form of cerebral palsy, and she was in constant, agonizing pain. We're talking years of surgeries, feeding tubes, and there were even more painful operations on the horizon. Her father, believing he was ending her unbearable suffering, took her life. The world was split. The courts called it murder. He called it an act of mercy. Now, when you hear these stories, your gut reaction is just pure emotion, right? And that's completely understandable. But to really understand what's at stake, we have to try and push past that initial feeling. We're going to carefully and logically unpack the arguments on every side of these cases, almost like a detective looking at the evidence. Okay, so let's go back to baby Theresa. Remember the facts. Anencephalic. She wasn't just going to die. In any way that we understand life, she wasn't really alive. No consciousness, no thoughts, no feelings, nothing. Her parents saw this one chance for her incredibly short and tragic life to have this profound, beautiful meaning, to save other kids who desperately needed organs. So the question for the courts was this: can we take her organs right now, while they're still viable, even if it technically speeds up her inevitable death? And this lays out the central conflict perfectly. On one side, you have what's called the benefits argument. It's a very pragmatic view. It says, hey, if we can save several other lives at absolutely no cost to baby Theresa, who literally has no experience of life and no future to lose, then shouldn't we? It's all about creating the best outcome. But then on the other side, you have these two really powerful absolute rules pushing back. First, you just don't kill one person to save another. And second, a huge principle: you should never use a person as a means to an end. From that point of view, taking her organs, even if she couldn't feel it, will be treating her body like a resource, and that violates her dignity. And this quote just nails it. The philosopher James Rachels points out that this is way bigger than just one tragic case. What we're seeing is this fundamental clash between two ways of thinking: a morality that's all about getting the best results versus a morality based on rules that you just don't break. And we're going to see this exact tension pop up again. Now, let's see how that very same tension plays out with Jodie and Mary. Remember, the doctors were certain. Leave them attached and both die. Separate them, Jodie lives, but Mary dies immediately. The parents said no, all life is sacred and we will not authorize an act that intentionally ends our daughter's life. The hospital, on the other hand, felt they had a duty to save the one child they could, so they took the whole thing to court. And there it is again, that same powerful conflict. The argument for separation is completely pragmatic, just like the one for baby Theresa. It's about the best possible outcome. Hey, saving one life is better than losing two, right? But the argument against it comes from this deeply held principle: the sanctity of life. For the parents, this meant you cannot intentionally kill an innocent person, period. It doesn't matter what the outcome is. The act itself is just wrong. So the really critical point here is that this case makes us ask, are any moral rules truly absolute? Is it possible there's a justifiable exception to a rule as fundamental as do not kill? The duty to save Jodie was in a direct, head-on collision with the duty not to kill Mary. And unlike baby Theresa, Mary was conscious. And that just makes the question so much sharper and the decision, well, even more agonizing. Our last case, man, this one is maybe the most emotionally raw of all. Tracy Latimer was 12 years old, but had the mental capacity of a 3-month-old and was in constant, horrible pain from her cerebral palsy. Her body was just twisted by seizures and contortions. She'd been through so many surgeries, had feeding tubes, and was about to face even more operations that doctors themselves admitted would only manage symptoms, not fix the agony. Her father, Robert, saw no end to her suffering, and he made the decision to end her life. He was convicted of second-degree murder, and it sparked this massive debate across Canada. The argument for what Robert Latimer did was one of pure compassion. He said his only motive was love, a desperate need to end a life that he saw as nothing but pain. He basically begged the courts to look at the reality of what her life actually was. But the argument against what he did was just as powerful, and it came from a totally different place. Disability advocates argued that his action, no matter the motive, sends a really dangerous message that the lives of disabled people are somehow less valuable. They warned of a slippery slope, that if you allow this kind of mercy killing, you could end up in a society where the lives of the most vulnerable people are no longer protected. So this case puts a very personal, specific act of mercy up against a huge societal principle of non-discrimination. It asks this profound question: can a person's quality of life ever be so terrible that ending it is the right thing to do? And how do you even start to answer that without accidentally devaluing the lives of so many other people? Okay, so we've looked at 3 wildly different cases, each with its own agonizing details and really complex arguments. But if you look closely at all the arguments we've weighed, the ones that feel thoughtful and serious on both sides, a pattern actually starts to emerge. There's a common thread running through all of them. Let's just retrace what we did here. We looked at the specific facts of each case, and we tried to separate them from our immediate emotional hit. Then we analyzed the arguments for and against, not based on feeling, but on the principles behind them. And in doing that, we've actually uncovered something pretty essential about what it even means to think morally. Now, this pattern doesn't give us some magic answer key for life's hardest questions. It's not going to tell you what you should have done in these situations. But what it does give us is something way more valuable: a framework, a reliable guide for how to approach moral choices, whether they're huge life and death decisions or the small ones we face every day. James Rachels calls this the minimum conception of morality. And this, right here, is the big takeaway. See, morality isn't just about following your gut or sticking to some old rule book. It's an active process. It is the effort to guide what you do by the very best reasons you can find, while, and this part is absolutely crucial, giving equal consideration to everyone who's going to be affected by your decision. It asks us to be thoughtful. So it really breaks down into these 2 core pillars. The first one is reason. This just means we have to do better than, well, it just feels right. We have to dig into the facts, think about the consequences, and weigh the principles that are in conflict, just like we did with every single case. The second pillar is impartiality. This demands that we step outside of our own bubble. For these cases, that meant the interests of the kids needing organs, the interests of Jodie, of Mary, of Tracy Latimer, all of them had to be weighed on the exact same scale, with no bias. It's that combination of clear-headed thinking and fair-mindedness that really defines a moral choice. So we have a guide: be reasonable, be impartial. It's a powerful tool, a kind of compass for navigating the moral maze. But it's so important to remember that this framework, it doesn't make the tragedy go away. It doesn't make the pain of these decisions just disappear. And that leaves us with one last thought to chew on. Having a map to help you think through the impossible is absolutely essential. But can a map ever really make that journey easy? Thanks for joining me.